Let's begin with some introduction. So I'll get started. I am Emil. I'm the marketing manager here at Bezedo, and I hope most of you already know what Bezedo does. We work with content moderation. Been doing that for 17, almost getting close to 18 years now. So been around for a while in this industry, helping marketplaces and dating sites, sharing economy, etc. And today I'm here with three superstars in the marketplace industry. And the first one is Jeroen. You can introduce yourself a bit quickly.
Sure, yeah, nice to be in the call, thanks. So I'm Jeroen, basically from the Netherlands, and I work for Speed Invest. And more in particular, I work for our focus fund that only invests in online marketplaces and platforms. It's called Speed Invest X. Before I joined Speed Invest, I was a marketplace entrepreneur myself, so I was on the other side of the table, building a marketplace for work and meeting spaces. And kind of in our spare time as investors for Speed Invest, we also organize a conference, which is called the Marketplace Conference.
Super. And I'm actually going to the conference the first time. This time it's in November, so it's an exciting one. The next one, Anton, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me here. I'm Anton, founder of Braincode, which is an agency that helps people and founders to build marketplaces. I started my journey with marketplaces a few years before, while I started building my own, failed it, learned some lessons, and now we're helping others with Braincode and other companies.
Yeah, we actually did a quick interview with Anton. What is it now? 2 months ago, something like that, about the experience of unfortunate.
So you want to hear how to fail? Go ahead and listen to it.
Yeah, so you can check that out. And last but not least is Martin Boss. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Martin Multimerch, and we offer marketplace platform solutions for e-commerce businesses. So we have our own marketplace software. We mostly work with product marketplaces like Etsy, Amazon, obviously smaller, but that's the thing we do. And actually started the whole thing as a developer years ago, and then I realized development isn't really for me. So I kind of switched to the founder role and went to do marketing and sales. I basically had to learn everything myself. So now we just build marketplaces for companies. That's our thing.
Yeah, super. Nice to have you all here. And I see we have some more people have called in now, and we started everything with a poll. So I'm going to reveal the results of the poll now. There we go. And interesting here is that we have no one saying that they work subscription or sign-up fee as the monetization strategy. Any thoughts from the panel on these numbers?
Well, I think it's obvious that the commission fees are the most predominant. So I think we have some interesting talk about that later in the call as well.
Yeah, well, I guess most of the answers come from product marketplace people. Since what we've seen here, most product marketplaces really do monetize by selling fees first and foremost. So I guess not so many answers from service platforms. That would be my guess.
Yeah. The subscriptions generally work when the basis is a SaaS business, so maybe we don't have many people from SaaS business yet.
Yeah, super. I'll hide the results and we'll dive into the first part of today's webinar, which is basically monetization trends in 2019. And Jeroen, will you take us into this part?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a super interesting question actually. I mean, before going into that, I think the basic thing that I want to say about building a marketplace and having a monetization strategy is that there are a lot of different options that you can use to monetize on your marketplace. We've listed them here on the slide, as you can see, and I think most of the people who are diving in, I guess, are familiar with most of these strategies. Just to highlight a few, a listing fee is obviously just a small fee that you would want to or need to pay in order to put something on the marketplace. And then alternatively, a lead generation based fee is basically a fee that you would have to pay if you have a potential buyer for your product or service. And then, as we also saw in the poll, I think the most common way of monetizing the marketplaces are commission-based fees. But basically, across all these different monetization strategies, I would say there's not a best or a worst. However, what I would argue, and I think for that we can actually go to the next slide, is that over time we are seeing that marketplaces are evolving from basically listing fees, advertising fees, lead generation fees, more towards fees that are actually happening around an actual transaction that's happening on the marketplace. And I think this graph is a good way of representing that a little bit, because I think this whole shift towards commission-based fees is basically inspired by two big innovations in the marketplace landscape. One is marketplaces are becoming more and more verticalized, meaning that they are more focused on a specific audience. And I think the second part is that marketplaces are becoming more managed, meaning that the marketplace as a whole takes way more responsibility in order, or basically to make a transaction happening between a buyer and a seller. Just some small examples here. Obviously, if you would look into Craigslist, that's a very horizontal marketplace. It provided some basic liquidity by showing supply and demand, but the marketplace itself didn't do much. It didn't do much to make a transaction happening, and you would basically have to go outside the platform to contact the buyer, negotiate a price, and facilitate the logistics. From there, you go to, I would say, the second generation of marketplaces, which are definitely way more verticalized, typically picking off various individual categories from Craigslist, such as, I know, like housing with Zillow and Zoopla, with food, with Grubhub, and maybe takeaway, and also like travel, like Booking.com, etc. And these marketplaces are way more specialized on the one hand for a specific audience, but they also took on more responsibility. For instance, by providing a level of trust, by doing reviews, by taking on payments. And if we move it even further to the upper right quadrant, we basically get into the more recent marketplace that we are seeing, where they take this verticalization and let's say highly managed marketplace to the extreme. And I think the great example here is obviously Uber, which does not only facilitate supply and demand to work together, but it also effectively sets the price, right? So if you go into the Uber app, you don't have to negotiate a price with a taxi driver. You simply take the price that's delivered on the platform. And I think in general, this whole shift from these very horizontal / lightweight marketplaces to these more like managed and verticalized marketplaces is also feeding into this trend of having way more monetization around the actual transaction rather than anything else. Maybe next slide is a quick example here, and just to, let's assume we want to buy a pair of secondhand shoes, and we compare the situation with how that would work on Craigslist versus on StockX. You would actually see that these are like two totally different worlds. So like I mentioned before, Craigslist shows you a list of who is selling what, but if you want to make the transaction happen, you would actually have to go outside the platform, contact the buyer, discuss a price, discuss a way of payment, discuss a way of logistics, and then try to make a transaction happen. StockX, on the other hand, is very different. It takes way more responsibility of making an actual transaction happening by facilitating the payment, by basically doing all the quality control. What's good to know is that StockX, you basically have to ship your shoe to the platform. The platform then kind of like authenticates the product, and then it sends it to the buyer. So for you as a buyer, you would actually not really care who the seller is, because you know the platform as such has basically delivered on the quality control. And I think what's the beauty here is that this kind of approach, by becoming more verticalized and managed, is, I think on the one hand, it allows the marketplace to capture more value of the whole transaction. And secondly, is also unlocking a whole shadow market of people that would really want to sell or buy secondhand shoes, but they would never want to use Craigslist, but will probably want to use StockX simply for a much better customer experience. And I think then to the final slide on what we see in the trends, is that by adding all these services, yes, indeed, there's a whole kind of shadow market that's get unlocked. And I think Uber is a great example there, because basically the size of the taxi market in San Francisco prior to Uber was way smaller to the size of the market for on-demand taxi hailing is right now, since Uber is in the market. So I think some of those are, I would say, the basic trends that we see in monetization. So based on the focus of marketplace to become more verticalized and more managed.
Yeah, no, this entire, transition on, like, it's been talks for a few years now, the transition of classifieds becoming marketplaces in that sense, offering more, taking more of that entire experience, or the entire transaction is handled by the platform, is really the move, and also affecting like how and where you can monetize. So very interesting.
Sure.
Did you guys have anything to add to this part, or shall we continue?
Yeah, I just want to mention that all these things are actually becoming the norm now. So 10 years ago, you could just spin up a platform like Craigslist, just list people, connect them with each other, and that'd be fine. Now people actually expect payment processing, communication, reviews, all that stuff is the new default. So you have to account for that.
Yeah, you need to build the whole experience. And so experience even comes before technology, I think.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Cool. Let's move on then to look at traditional monetization strategies that still seem to work. This is a question that maybe a lot of you guys are scratching your head around, like what still works today. And Martin, can you start off by talking more about product marketplaces?
Yeah, sure. So since we mostly work with product marketplaces, we recently did some research on a few specific industries. So we looked at the handmade marketplace industry and the luxury or fashion marketplace industry. So for handmade, it's artists, crafters selling art, selling handmade stuff online. So Etsy and everything. And what we are looking for, we were pretty curious what monetization options are still popular in different industries. And for handmade, that's what we figured out. So most of them still do selling fees or commissions, just like the poll result showed. These are like one of the most popular monetization strategy. Quite a few of them do subscriptions. So you pay a specific monthly or yearly fee to be a vendor on marketplace. But there are also different monetization options like sign-up fees, listing fees, payment processing fees, and other types of fees. So it's pretty diverse. And then we compare that to the fashion industry. So platforms for buying and selling used fashion, like handbags and accessories, stuff like that. And here, what we find out here is almost all of them really depend on selling fees or consignment fees, basically commissions. So that actually surprised me quite a lot. I wasn't really sure what to expect, and it's pretty interesting. So pretty much none of them use sign-up fees. We looked at over like almost 100 platforms, no sign-up fees. Just one or two use listing fees. Just one or two use subscriptions, and almost all of them just depend on selling fees. So we tried to understand why that, and I think it's mostly because the item price really differs a lot, and the average order value differs a lot. So with handmade, you have products selling at $5, $10, and selling quite often. With fashion, you can sell a handbag for $5,000, and that's it. So sign-up fees don't really work here. Listing fees, not so much as well. Subscriptions, some of them do try that, but looks like it's not the best idea. Probably not too many return purchases. So yeah, at least for these two industries, it looks like selling fees work the best. subscriptions are second place, and some of them still do use sign-up and listing fees for handmade. That's how it looks for handmade and fashion platforms. And I think I'll just have to pass that to Anton for service marketplaces, since we don't really work with services.
Sure. So these are the different possibilities. So the most popular one, as we know, is commission. So all the biggest marketplaces like Uber, Airbnb, Eventbrite use them. But there are also possibilities by using subscription. So Booksy, where you can hire actually a hairdresser, go to hairdresser. The usage is subscription here, Contently or GetResponse, which is the system for emails. You basically pay a subscription and you have a free access to the marketplace part. Some marketplaces like Zillow and Yardbook still rely on advertising, although, for instance, Zillow is experimenting with other different possibilities and also with commissions. There are still also marketplaces that rely on lead gen strategy, which is they are charging for the lead delivered to the provider, which is the examples are CarWow, where you can buy a car and you have dealers kind of competing for a best deal to give a customer, or Thumbtack for home services. The new trend here is the API monetization. This API uses a lot of it. Basically, the whole platform is built on connecting to the different APIs and making connections very easy. Although they are also kind of a subscription business, but they rely mainly on APIs of other businesses and kind of sometimes even pay for those APIs. SendGrid, which is a system for email distribution, and as a part of Twilio, Twilio is also allows you to send text messages and calls to basically and connect it to any CRM or any other system you would think of. There are also some marketplaces experiment with value-added services. These are generally added on top of the existing monetization strategy. For instance, we have Amazon Lending, which lends money to its users to allow them to build a bigger stockpile of products on Amazon warehouses. Uber is also helping with the financing for cars for its users. So yeah, mainly this is works as an add-on feature to the existing monetization. And there are also partnerships. For instance, Yelp and Grubhub. So Yelp has a huge audience of users, and you can actually order food from Yelp from a given restaurant, but it will be delivered by Grubhub. So Grubhub is adding kind of the logistics part, and they don't disclose how do they pay to each other, but I would think it's a part of commission fees, but it's a kind of different look on this, how you can work with the partners. Same, eBay is working with escrow to check the partners and vendors on the platform. I heard also OLX is partnering in Ukraine and Philippines with the logistics providers, where you can not only buy the product online, but also have it being delivered to you by the logistics partner.
Yeah, and we have actually received a couple of questions, so I figured that this is a good timing to ask them as well. One from Martin here is basically, do you have any good monetization strategies for swap/barter marketplaces?
Yeah, so we don't really work with these. Most of our projects are regular product marketplaces, but I would say subscriptions or sign-up fees, or perhaps listing fees would work the best. With subscriptions, it's at least from what we've seen, it works in a lot of different projects. So most of our new marketplace owners start with subscriptions. They don't really have too many vendors. They don't really have too many sales going. Perhaps they can't process payments through the platform yet. So they just start with subscriptions. They collect them from vendors. And once they get that going, they can try and implement other monetization options. So I would say for barter, if you don't really process payments, that would be a neat idea. At least I would probably start with that, see how it goes.
I think it also depends a little bit on what kind of marketplace it is, right? So if I hear barter or swapping marketplace, I think about, I would say, a peer-to-peer. And I think in general, this is a type of marketplace that probably doesn't really exist yet beyond the marketplace that have been built so far. And I guess it's totally fine to also charge a commission fee for these kind of like marketplaces when you're basically entering a new space, right? So things like, I don't know, Fat Llama or stuff like that, I'm pretty sure that they heavily monetize also based on a transaction fee, simply because the marketplace is the only way where you can actually have a certain liquidity volume that is sort of like helpful for people that want to either like barter or swap something.
Yeah, I mean, if you do process payments, so if it's not just pure barter, one for something else,
yeah,
then you can also try and do sales. If there are no payments between the parties, then I would say try a subscription and see if that works for you.
Or also charge for vetting suppliers, because actually I think trust in terms of barter marketplaces is very big issue. So having vetted people who will pay like one-time fee for being vetted or for good behavior, it could be an option.
Yeah, I think in the Netherlands there's a platform called Peerby or Peerby, and it's basically a platform that started with bartering, and they would also try to or just like a short-term lending platform, but then for free. So if you would need, I don't know, you would need a kitchen machinery of some sort, you could basically go to the platform, ask around your neighborhood who has this actually available, and they would actually start monetizing on insurance, obviously as an additional feature for people that want to use the platform, but also want to make sure that the product returns in a good shape.
Super. I hope that answers your question, Martin, and that really triggered everyone else to send in their questions. So that's really exciting to see as well. We can pop in one more question here, I think, because it was the first one we actually got, and then we can proceed, and then we have a Q&A session in the end. So keep on sending your questions, guys. It's really fun. So we had one from Hung, who asks, is a transaction fee possible for marketplace with big value like car or property?
Absolutely, I think you just need, if it's a high value, your fee is just will be probably low, but in general I think it's absolutely possible.
Yeah, I mean, it will work if you can keep the transaction on the platform. So for high value products, the big problem is buyers are just agreeing to go somewhere else. So if you can provide enough value for them, maybe punish them somehow, but usually you have to provide enough value for them to keep everything on the platform. Then sure, then it should work.
I think what is, just to add to that, I think what's good to keep in mind is that it doesn't really matter, I would say, which monetization strategy that you use, but I think one helpful way to look at how you are monetizing is basically setting off the total charges that you have for someone using your platform compared to the GMV. So that means that, let's say, if you charge 100 euros in either commissions or lead gen fees or on subscription fees or whatever fees, on a total value of 1,000, you basically have a 10% rate. And if you look at all different platforms out there, they typically also use a set of different monetization strategies. For instance, Booking.com, it has I would say a flat fee of, I don't know, 10% or so per booking, or maybe a bit higher now. But you can basically get, let's say, additional promotion by doing additional promoted listings where you pay extra on top. So it's basically a combination of different models switching together. So I think the best way to look at monetization is simply adding all these different monetization strategies on top, and then comparing the amount of money that you take to the overall transaction volume that is running through your platform.
Yeah, and just the two examples of marketplaces that work on cars and on homes are Open Door in US for homes and Carvana for cars. So you can have a look at it.
Yeah, super. Very helpful, guys. Let's move on to the next slide, which is back to you, Martin, about payment solutions and options.
Yeah, sure. Since we do work with product marketplaces and we help build them, we also have to work with marketplace payment solutions. So I recently did a roundup of different marketplace payment solutions, and with marketplace payments, I mean payment solutions aimed specifically at two-sided marketplaces. So in most cases, you'll be looking at something like parallel split payments, payment aggregation, automation, and things like these. So, and what we found at least around 30 different marketplace-specific payment platforms. And it seems to be getting better. So some 5-10 years ago, you would only have something like Stripe, maybe PayPal Adaptive. Now PayPal Adaptive doesn't exist anymore, so they're trying to replace it with something else. But there's a big change in terms of marketplaces. Regular payment processors are getting into the marketplace game. They're starting to offer specific marketplace payment solutions, and it happens in different regions. So it's not only in Europe or US. You have different platforms in different countries. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. You have way more options right now to start a marketplace platform than what you'd have some 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, super. So in a scenario now when you know which strategy you're going for, you find a new monetization strategy as a marketplace that you want to integrate. We move on to the next area. The last part before we jump into questions is what to consider when integrating monetization strategies. Anton.
Yeah. So when you are implementing a strategy, first of all, definitely you need to think about how much about the rake, as Jerome mentioned, maybe not a commission, how much in total you will be earning. You also need to think about marginal cost, which is the cost of how hard it is for a provider on the marketplace to deliver a product or a service. For instance, in Etsy's case, you need to, the provider has to buy the materials, build the product, and then sell it. So you cannot charge high transaction fees because it's already a hard labor for him to deliver this product. You need to also think about competition. So look at your niche and see if there are, how much are other companies charging, and you can sometimes try to undercut them. This was the case with the Steam gaming platform, which is generally charges 30% for publishing a game on their marketplace. And Unreal, the other company, wanted to undercut them, so they started charging 5%. And there was a big flock of game developers moving to Unreal because of much lower percentage. Network effects. Well, it's you can play it both ways. So if you see that you have strong network effects, you can at one point charge more for this because you have a big leverage. For instance, Shutterstock does this. They have they have a huge repository of images, so they sometimes charge 50 to 70% fee. But also you can use it as a competitive advantage and charge less to undercut your competition. because if you have strong network effect, this means that your costs of acquiring a user are lower than normally, because more users attract other users, so you don't spend as much on marketing. And the other thing you can use is differentiation of providers, where, for instance, Airbnb gives out coupons to superhosts. If you are a superhost, if you meet some criteria, you get a nice badge, and you are being serviced much faster. So this also can be done with different like premium listings and other stuff. So to differentiate better providers from other providers. As mentioned before, you need to look at the frequency of transactions and size of the transactions. So as mentioned before, in terms of cars and homes, the transactions are large, so you cannot charge 30% commission, because this friction would be too strong. So you need to charge smaller percentages. And if the frequency is high, you can also charge a little bit less. If your frequency of transactions is low, you need to charge a little bit more to kind of recoup, to balance the marketplace. Yeah, and the last thing is how much value your marketplace is adding. For instance, you have Upwork on one side, which has a lot of freelancers, and it charges around 20% commission. And on the other side, you have TopTal, which has very vetted developers, top-notch developers. And TopTal generally has, it doesn't disclose their commission, but it oscillates around 40 to 60%. This happens because they put a lot of work to bring the best people on their marketplace. So they say they only accept 5% of people applying for the marketplace. So once you add a lot of value, you can claim and charge more for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, like a lot of people also come to us when they are building a marketplace business, and they ask us, okay, how much can we ask for in our monetization strategy? And I think that's a super tough one to answer, right? I mean, I think you definitely need to take into consideration a lot of factors to find the optimal price. And I would also encourage everyone to really experiment with what is the best price to charge. And it really depends on a situational basis. I think one thing that is helpful is to think of pricing also as a form of friction. And I think eventually, if you want to build a really meaningful platform, you want to make sure that the whole transaction process is as smooth as possible. So you also don't want to ask too high of a price for your marketplace, because it would simply mean that you actually ask for a lot of friction, and people will try to find ways to go around the marketplace, which we would call disintermediation. And I think, you know, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, he's obviously very famous for saying, you know, basically your margin is my opportunity, being that obviously when there is a little bit of margin to be made, Amazon can always try to undercut it and therefore still get access to the market. At the same time, though, I don't think you should necessarily raise to as little as possible, basically. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs making the mistake to even like underprice themselves and asking for a too low commission. And because I also think there's one big benefit of asking a higher commission, which is simply you get more money in, which you can then spend on acquiring more new customers or providing a better service, right? So if you manage to increase your monetization from 10% to 20%, it effectively means you get double the money. So I think it's really about fine-tuning your ideal rate, basically. And I don't think there are necessarily simple benchmarks that you can apply. I think it's really different from industry to industry.
Yeah, all good points. A few things I would like to add. First, you have to keep in mind what's the stage of your project. So what we see with small to medium marketplace owners, many of them start with only a few vendors, early low transaction volume. So many of them start with no monetization strategy at all. So they just don't collect fees at all. Then they try to grow their platform. Maybe they start gathering subscription fees or something like that. And then when they get things going, they switch to sales fees. So first, keep your stage of project in mind. Second, you don't really have to settle for one option. You can switch later. So that's definitely possible as well.
Nice.
Constantly monitoring and adjusting. It's a kind of yeah. You need to think at where are you now and where are you going, and constantly monitor this. So it's not like you can set one price and just go with it.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, so that makes me thinking a little bit about, we spoke more about maybe younger, smaller marketplaces. But if you look at the reverse, or the opposite, I should say, if we look at larger marketplaces, more mature marketplaces that are established regional players who look to find a new monetization strategy, how should they go about implementing or integrating a new strategy?
So who wants to take that one? It's a delicate topic, huh? I think in general, it's not super easy when you're a very large marketplace to really change the way you monetize. I think there are some examples that are trying to do it. For instance, Yelp. I think Yelp is historically really based on basically advertising, where people that want to be listed on Yelp have to pay some sort of fee to be present there. And they try to move towards transactions, but it's still only a fraction of the overall revenue that they make. What I do see happen is that some of the owners of these traditional classifieds basically actively investing or trying to integrate with different players in their field that use a different type of monetization. So that means that you have perhaps large media companies such as Naspers and Chipset who are owning a lot of the traditional classified platforms across the world. They're also a very active investor in basically the new wave of marketplaces that are popping up. And I guess that's one way how they try to make their whole overall business model more prone to are more defensible towards innovation from different marketplaces.
Yeah, I also think that they can leverage partnerships as Yelp did with Grubhub, so to add something to their service. So because they generally were working only with one part, which is kind of discovery, and that's it. And to add more service levels, they can do it by partnering or using more data. For instance, showing, I think Zillow does this. When you click on the home, you can also see how far are the schools, how far is the, I don't know, some office centers. They have their own some index of how good the pricing is. So adding more value using a lot of different data or engaging more partners, yeah, to defend themselves. Or as Jerome said, invest in other guys who are more niche down.
Yeah, and as a big business, the thing is you have a lot of users, so you will piss someone off with your new monetization options. So you just have to keep that in mind, who your core audience is and what works for them. So for example, Etsy is raising their sales fees, and a lot of small business owners, individual sellers are really unhappy about that. But I'm pretty sure it works for Etsy since now they focus on bigger vendors, on more transactions. So that's something you have to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I think also one benefit that these larger players have, who have built these huge classified businesses, is basically that they benefit a lot from network effects, right? It's very hard to build a new marketplace, but once you have built a very big marketplace, also very hard to get destroyed. So I think what we will probably continue to see is that some of these larger platforms who have different monetization strategies around advertising will still persist for some time and basically really get the maximum out of the platform. and it might actually take still quite some years before they get either like fully replaced or basically taken over by competitors trying different monetization strategies.
Yeah, that's true. So we'll still see quite a lot of experiments, since you have to experiment with monetization, and it's pretty difficult to screw things up so badly with new monetization options. So I'm sure we'll see a lot of that.
Craigslist still exists and still has ugly interface, but still works. So
yeah, I think every country has its examples where, because in the Netherlands it's a company called Marktplaats. It looks horrible, but somehow it has so much liquidity that a lot of people keep returning to the platform, right? So it will probably take quite some time before another player comes in and really takes their place as #1 classifieds.
Super. I hope we don't have someone from Marktplaats sitting here, and then I'll send you Jerome's email afterwards.
I think it's great business. Huh? It's like from the investor point of view, it's good business.
Yeah, super. I know that we are way over time. This was supposed to be a 30-minute webinar, but we just arrived to the questions point, and we have some still. I wouldn't mind asking them to you guys. I think you're still keen on it. So Vivek asked basically 2 questions. One is very specific. Is there any specific insight that you have for monetization strategies for real estate listing platforms? It's pretty broad, but I'm thinking, is there any recommendations that you might have for real estate platforms?
Well, I think the basic trend is that what you see is that we move from advertising here to also or listing fees or anything, or lead gen fees, also towards transaction fees. Obviously, with the rise of models like Open Doors or Coded.io, which we invested in ourselves. But in terms of great examples, I think it really depends on what you want to achieve as a platform, right? So I think where Open Doors really wants to make it easy for you to sell your apartment by really buying the apartment from you, then kind of like refurbishing and then selling it, it offers a very different experience than a platform like Zillow or Zoopla does. So I think I would first look at, okay, what sort of value towards the customer do you want to deliver, and then look at, okay, what would be the best way to monetize on this behavior. I mean, unfortunately, I can't be more specific, but I think that's a good starting point.
Good. Do you guys want to add anything, Anton or Martin, or shall we jump to the next question?
I think Jerome said it all. I could just repeat it.
I'll just agree with him about that.
Okay, super. I hope that answers your question, Vivek. For your other question, we have, do regional factors play a big role in the success of a monetization strategy? For example, would a successful strategy in Europe necessarily be successful in Southeast Asia?
Well, what we've seen in different regions, some monetization options aren't really possible in different regions. For example, we have marketplaces in Europe, they charge selling fees since they do the payment processing. We have some marketplaces in Middle East, and people there aren't really keen on online payments. So a lot of that happens in person. A lot of that happens via cash on delivery. So in this case, you have to keep that in mind. What works in Europe may not work in a different region if the region has some local specifics about payment processing, for example.
Does that also mean that in those cases you would see more, I don't know, listing fees and more maybe advertising fees rather than?
Yeah, so either that, or we'll see more interesting takes on collecting selling fees. So for example, one of our marketplace owners actually deals with deliveries himself, and he can gather the selling fee like manually from the vendor when he gets his products to deliver. So that's one possibility.
Yeah, generally when you go global, it's the complexity is multiplying. So especially when you're also working on some freelance marketplaces or hiring marketplaces. Is the different legal systems can really strike your model. For instance, in Poland, you cannot be just a freelancer and receive money. You need to be employed. So there is one marketplace that we worked with that we had to build the whole system of issuing contracts, signing contract, issuing of the GDPR acceptance in order for it to perform in Poland. But in other countries, not a big issue. You can work without it. So yeah, you definitely need to check the legal part for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing, and one more thing is the regional availability of your payment options. So if you use Stripe to gather selling fees in Europe, and you expand to some country that doesn't support Stripe and doesn't really have any local split payment solutions, then you'll have to figure something out.
Yeah, super. I think we will round off with one last question, as we are way beyond the time limit. And for the last one, we have from Lee. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It's for traditional and horizontal marketplaces. Do you see it's being possible to move to transactional model as it takes a lot of effort?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my point of view, I think they will definitely try, but it's not super easy. I think in particular when you are a horizontal marketplace, because that de facto means you are running basically multiple verticals at once. And I think if you want to deliver a seamless experience, you ideally create the whole customer journey in such a way that that it's really catered toward that specific scenario. And if you're a horizontal marketplace, I think it's very hard to simply deliver on that promise. Full stop. So it's not easy. I'm sure it can be done, but I think you will simply lack a few features or processes that make it a super nice and smooth process to transact.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not impossible. It's difficult, but you just have to try and see if you can do that.
Or you can go try to niche down, so select some kind of some parts of the horizontal market that you have, and then try to build the services. But it will take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So, and it can damage a little bit the whole marketplace. So yeah.
There we go. Super. I hope that answers the question, and that's it for today. So first off, keep an eye out in your inboxes now for that checklist or guide that I mentioned in the beginning about some of the monetization strategies that we discussed today. And then I just want to say thank you to everyone calling in, and thank you to our lovely panel.
Yeah, thanks guys. Nice talking to you today. See you sometime.
Yeah, well done guys, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.